What do you do when you realize your workplace has become a toxic and unhealthy environment? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Life Jack, the Resilience Podcast. Life Jack is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Jacquie Abram, is the international best-selling and award-winning author of Hush Money, How One Woman Proves Systemic Racism in Her Workplace, and the instructor of the masterclass, How to Fight Discrimination in a Toxic Workplace. Jacquie's journey from a lucrative career in higher education to becoming a leading voice in fighting racial discrimination is truly inspiring.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life jacked.
Hi, Jacquie. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am doing well, and I am so excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Now, how are things in your life leading up to the moment when you received notification of your new job at the institution?
So I had a lucrative career in higher education that spanned nearly 20 years. And throughout that time frame, I had numerous different positions. And so I kind of ran from company to company, not necessarily because I wanted to, but because my career kept being derailed no matter what company I ran to, because I could run from this company over here because I was Black, but I ended up running to another company, and guess what? I was still Black. And so I experienced the same thing over and over and over again.
Wow. So in these institutions that you were where you were employed, were there signs of discrimination? Were they subtle or blatantly obvious? Like, how long did it take for you to realize exactly what it was?
So the interesting thing is that when I was in each position, things always started out being great in the beginning. And so there were really no signs that you were going to run into trouble early on. But usually about maybe 2 months in, that's when you really started to notice some things. And so I discovered in the different positions that I had that although the companies were different, the playbook that they were using to derail my career was the same. And it all started out with something that I call being set up to fail. So, when you are brand new in a company, for example, and they are onboarding you, and during that training process, that's where you start running into trouble, although you can't immediately see it right away. You have no idea that they're either giving you the wrong information about how to do this job in this company, or the information that they're giving you as they're training and onboarding you is limited. So it's not including information that is vital to your success in this position that you've been hired into. So you're really set up for failure right out of the gate because you've either gotten incorrect information about how to do your job in this new company or limited information. But then, Dr. Rowe, there was something else that was consistent across every job I had. Not only was I given this limited or wrong information about how to do my job, but there were always issues with the equipment, In every single job, you're having computer issues right out of the gate. And so, I always tell people, in one of the jobs that I had, that computer system was older than dirt. In fact, I am convinced that they found that computer system that they gave me in some archaeological dig somewhere because it was slower than dirt.
Wow. And, it's interesting. Myself as an African-American woman, of course, I work in K-12 education, but still just in jobs, right? And I've had a couple of jobs outside of education in nonprofit arenas. And I can tell you that you're right. There seems to be a common theme at times when you're in certain spaces. And I know as Black women, if we're too passionate about a topic, then it gets translated into, oh, we're being too aggressive. If we hold our ground on what we believe in, once again, we're accused of being aggressive, right? It's like, well,
exactly.
No, I get to stand my ground as an adult professional and, communicate what I feel and what my ideas are. And why does it seem like, in your opinion, what do you think? Why does it seem like that the immediate go-to is, oh, no, you're just too aggressive? Can you kind of tone it down? And all these other things that seem to plague us when we're in these jobs.
Oh, absolutely. Well, remember that playbook that I just mentioned, the companies have figured out a more sinister, hidden way to specifically target Black women and, quite frankly, Black men in their positions, but do it in a way that they can't easily prove it. It's hidden. It's harder to prove. When it's happening to you, you can't tell that it's racism or you can't tell that it's discrimination. And because you can't tell as it's happening to you, the people around you can't tell either. And so no one's calling it out. Now, the angry Black woman trope that you mentioned, that's something that has been automatically assigned to us as Black women. And this is their go-to. It's always been their go-to. But when you add the sinister, more hidden form of discrimination to that angry Black woman trope, and you start doing all of these things together, it really creates a toxic environment for that Black woman who's being targeted. So let me just give you an example of what that looks like. I gave you an example of what being set up to fail looks like, for example. But then in addition to that, there's something else that I like to call the Black Workhorse. And so, as Black women, we know, and these companies, quite frankly, know that, we have to work twice as hard, for less. So that's an automatic given. The companies know we're going to go into their organization and work twice as hard. And we know that we're going to have to go into that organization and work twice as hard. So where the Black Workhorse comes into play is it's actually something more sinister than the idea of working twice as hard. In the Black Workhorse scenario, so first you were set up to fail, so you're already struggling with learning how to do your job right out of the gate and with keeping up with the quality and the quantity of work that this other non-Black person in the same position is doing because your equipment is not working right out of the gate. But then with the Black Workhorse, as you start noticing these weeks going by, you're realizing that your supervisor is adding a lot of extra work to your plate on top of everything that was listed in your job description. And we're not talking little extra duties here or there. We're talking massive projects or full-blown positions. And so you were hired to do one job, but as those weeks and months go by, you find yourself doing 2, 3, sometimes 4 positions, So you're doing the work of 4 people, but you're not getting paid to do all of this extra work. And so they're burying you under a mountain of work, and it's a workload that no human can carry. So you're carrying this massive workload. There's no work-life balance. Your personal relationships are suffering while you are still making mistakes. Your job is being threatened. You're being written up because you've been set up to fail. And so you add these 2 things together, and then you throw in that angry black woman trope because you're feeling some kind of way, and this is something that they feel they can now use against you, and most often time they do, but they don't stop there. That's the problem. They don't stop there. They keep adding these covert types of discrimination into what I call the cake bowl until it's baked into your experience in that organization, and you either fall to your knees from the weight of this as you're experiencing trauma, or you resign to save your sanity, or you quit, or you get fired because they have set you up.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the word covert, because there is this term, covert racism. Can you explain exactly what is covert racism?
Okay, very good. So if you think about an iceberg, for example, you know, an iceberg floating out there in the middle of the ocean?
Yes.
If you've ever wondered, you know, how is it, okay, that this iceberg is sitting out there in the middle of the ocean, it's not going anywhere, it's just sitting out there, but how is it that this doggone iceberg was so successful in sinking all of those ships, like the Titanic, for example? And it's because back in the day, before there was satellite available, the captain of a ship had to use his eyesight to determine at which point he needs to start navigating around this iceberg that he sees in front of him. Now, the problem is the captain didn't realize that what he saw was only 10% of that full iceberg. He didn't realize that only 10% was poking up above that water line, okay? And so if you think about covert and overt racism, overt racism is similar to that 10% of that iceberg that this captain can see. It's happening above the surface, but it's really easy to spot, okay? So when it happens, people that see it happening, like this captain who sees this iceberg here, they see it happening and they're going to immediately call it out. So an example of overt racism is, you know, you're sitting in the break room with a bunch of people having lunch, and someone walks in and calls you the N-word, okay? Well, that's overt. Everybody can see it happening. Everybody knows that it's racism, and someone in that break room is going to call it out because it's socially unacceptable. And they're going to say, you can't say that here, and there's going to be consequences for that person. So 10%, only 10% of the racism happening in today's workplace is above the surface and easy to see, like that little piece of the iceberg. Now, going back to this captain on this ship who sees this iceberg, he starts making his decision to navigate around that iceberg, but what he doesn't realize is that he's only seeing 10%. The remaining 90% of that iceberg is lurking below the water surface. He can't see it. He doesn't know it's there. And what makes this part lurking under that water surface more dangerous is that it's wider than the part of the iceberg the captain can see. It's longer than the part of the iceberg the captain can see. And because of its width and density, it is absolutely stronger than the part of the iceberg this captain knows is there. And so when he begins to navigate around this iceberg, it is the bottom part of his ship that's underneath the water with this giant portion of the iceberg that collides. And so the bottom part of that ship gets damaged, takes on water, and sinks that entire ship. Now, in the workplace, that bottom part, that 90%, lurking below that water surface where it's hidden, represents covert racism, okay? And so it's hidden. It's harder to prove. You can't see it. You don't know it's there. Now, the difference between overt and covert is, like I said, overt you can easily see. Somebody's going to call it out, and it's deemed socially unacceptable. Covert racism, because it's hidden, you can't tell if you're experiencing racism when it's happening to you. So when people are seeing it happening to you and when you're experiencing it, no one is calling it out, okay? No one's calling it out. So it gets baked into the culture of that organization, and it's deemed socially acceptable. So an example that I gave you was being set up to fail. Well, yes, you were given the wrong information about how to do your job, but how can you prove that that person intentionally trained you the wrong way? It's very difficult. Black Workhorse, okay? So you're adding the Black Workhorse into that cake bowl. They're going to say, you signed this job description that said you were responsible for all these duties and all other duties as assigned. So you knew we were going to give you other duties.
That's the one. That other duties as assigned.
That's right. And so that's what makes it more difficult, is these things are socially acceptable. And there are so many, just so many different types of covert racism. And what makes them highly effective, okay, is another type of covert racism that I call inspire to conspire, okay? So in order for your career to be destroyed, Dr. Rowe, okay, it can't just be anybody that can destroy your career in that organization, because you've got a lot of people around you who have biases against you. They may not think your hair is professional, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a maintenance manager tell me that, that can't be your real hair because it's too shiny, okay? So you have people who have biases against you already, okay? Maybe they don't like the cultural clothing you're wearing. Maybe they don't think your hair is professional. Maybe they don't like the soul food that you're warming up in the break room, in the microwave. But these people can't kill your job, can't destroy your career. It takes a leader, okay? A leader in that organization. And Dr. Rowe, this leader can be anybody. I'm going to tell you, some of the most horrific leaders that I had over my nearly 20-year career were actually Black women, okay, who upheld a white supremacist ideology. Now, does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I wonder why that is, because I, even as a leader, as an African-American woman, as a Black woman, have been met with resistance because of that stereotype. And I'm thinking, no, I actually know about that stereotype, and I'm fighting against it to not be that. I want to help everyone. I want to make sure that there's more than one of us at the table. But it's interesting with that there is this perception of Black female leaders, but some of them have lived up to that.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's so interesting, but let me ask, with the covert racism, right? Because, like you said, it's harder to prove. Just want it to be dealt with, right? It's just, for example, if someone, like you said, it's overt, or someone slaps you in the face, or someone is, undermining you, all you want is it to be addressed. You want accountability, and you want acknowledgement, and you want it to be addressed and handled. The end. I want to move on because I like my job. I like what I'm doing. But if all of those things are happening, how can someone speak up? How should someone speak up and address the issue in a safe way to where, that something can be handled?
So I teach a class called How to Fight Discrimination in a Toxic Workplace. And so remember I said earlier that there were numerous different types of covert racism. And I also said one of the types that is just mixed in, baked into the cake, is actually very effective, is something called inspire to conspire, okay? And so if you wanted to fight this company, you wanted to fight this leader, you want these things to stop, the first thing you have to do is understand what you're dealing with, okay? Because you cannot fight what you can't see. And remember, I told you it's hidden. It's harder to prove. And so in my class, we spend a great deal of time opening the eyes of Black folks, okay? Showing them this is what you're dealing with. So going back to that inspire to conspire, you have someone in that organization, a leader, who decides to target you, okay? They decide to mess with you. They decide to target you. And although it's that leader who decided to target you and begins the act of derailing your career, they're never alone. Because of their position as a leader, they have power and authority to put actions behind those biases that the other people have against you. These leaders have the power and authority to put action behind those biases. And because of their influence as a leader, they are able to inspire other people in the organization to conspire with them. And so before you know it, you're not just being targeted by one person anymore. You are now being targeted by a mob of people who are all working together to destroy your career. Now, HR is the first person this leader taps to conspire with them, okay? So in toxic workplaces, HR is always going to conspire with this leader because at the end of the day, they know who they are beholden to because of who pays their paycheck, and it's not you. I remember in one of my positions where the person who ended up destroying my career was my best friend. And when I confronted her, I said, how could you do this to me? She said, if I have to choose between me paying my mortgage and you paying your mortgage, I choose me.
Oh, whoa, some friend.
Mm-hmm. And so this is what you're dealing with. This leader knows how to inspire others. So you've got HR that is now inspired to conspire. Your own employees, okay? Your own employees. So in my case, while I was working remotely one day a week to go to chemotherapy with my mom who was battling stage 4 colon cancer, my toxic leader was meeting with somebody on my team and promising him my job. So now my employee has been incentivized to watch my comings and goings, make up stuff about me, false accusations about harassment, false accusations about me doing unethical things. And so now you've got HR and you've got my employee working with you, setting me up, doing all of these different things. IT was even tapped. They had me under 24/7 electronic surveillance, watching my keystrokes, everything I did. And so you have a sea of people, other Black people, who don't want this toxic leader targeting them, so they're going to help to keep that person's radar off of them, okay? So you've got all of these people who have now been inspired to conspire, and they're all working together. So in order for you to fight this battle, the first thing you have to understand is what you're dealing with. And that is the first thing. After you do that, then you can map out a strategy. And Dr. Rowe, one of the reasons my Hush Money books are just doing so well. I mean, I wrote Hush Money from a very dark place, okay, because I'm not a professional writer. I didn't know the first thing about writing a book. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know anything about the whole book process. But I was in a very dark place, and so I wanted to teach our people what I knew, because although my career was repeatedly derailed, and I walked away from every toxic job, I never walked away empty-handed. Okay, I've got multiple six-figure settlements because I knew how to fight. And I wanted to teach our people how to fight because so many of them, they run from job to job to job. But you were Black over here, like I said at the beginning. And when you ran to that next job, you were still Black. And because we live in a racist society, the same thing continues to happen.
Now, many organizations and companies in corporate America, or not even just corporate America, just companies and organizations. So they have this new initiative, the DEI initiative, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They hire a consultant or they actually make it a position within the company. And that person is supposed to bring light to cultural differences and cultural awareness and make sure that everyone is being fair and that all those who are considered a minority, to make sure that everything is done, whether there's a minority because of race or gender or language, perhaps they speak another language, or even disability. So do you think that those initiatives or these consultants or these positions, do you believe that they are effective? Because there's also people trying to take them away too.
Well, they're actually being very effective in taking the DEI positions away. So let me just back up a little bit. After the brutal, just absolutely brutal murder of George Floyd, a lot of companies and organizations, they, came forward and they said, we want to make a difference. We want to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, there were a lot of organizations that came forward. They created ERGs, employee resource groups. They brought in, like you said, DEI consultants. They either hired full-time DEI folks and created departments. But what has happened over the years is that the term DEI has become weaponized, okay? And so it has become a political weapon. And because of that, because it has been weaponized along with the term woke, okay, companies have now started backing away from DEI and eliminating DEI positions. In fact, I have a student in my class, okay, who was just heartbroken because she was the chief DEI person at the university where she worked, and they got a letter from the president who said that their positions were eliminated by order of the government, the governor. And I said, "You're kidding." And she actually sent me the letter that said the DEI positions were eliminated by order of the governor. And so this is happening across many different states because it has been politicized, and now DEI, they've taken over the original intent of that, and they've made it something evil. They're saying, some of the conversations that I'm hearing is they're saying, DEI is the equivalent of reverse racism. DEI is against white people. And so because of that, companies are backing away.
Wow, interesting. Now your book, that is an international bestseller and award-winning. Congratulations. But
Thank you.
Yes, your book, Hush Money, how has it impacted the lives of Black employees who have faced racism or toxic, working environments?
So, remember, as I said, I was in a really dark place when I wrote Hush Money. And it's not that I didn't know how to fight, Dr. Rowe. I was exceptional at fighting back. I was an expert at fighting these different companies, and I actually took down, more than a half a dozen. I never walked away from a single toxic job empty-handed. But no amount of money that you receive from these organizations ever undoes the harm, okay, the harm that was caused to you. And so by the end of my career, I was so exhausted from having to fight and claw my way, being forced out of these companies and living off of the little bit of savings that I had accumulated, and finding myself homeless when that savings ran out while I'm still fighting this company because, yes, I was an expert at fighting, okay, but it takes time to get those settlements. And in the meantime, you don't have an income. You've exhausted your savings. You can't pay your bills or provide for your children, and you find yourself homeless. And so after having my career derailed, 5 different times, I was just exhausted. And so I really was mentally damaged. I was broken. I was mentally damaged. I was emotionally and physically damaged. I wanted to hurt myself. I wanted to hurt others. And I was in a very, very, very dark place, okay? But God said no. God said no on the day that I planned to do the unthinkable. God intervened and he said no. And he showed me that what I thought was a me problem, because I actually thought I was going crazy. I was like, I just don't understand this. I communicate effectively across the board. I am very, very skilled. I approach my job in an exceptional way. I have the credentials that these companies said that they wanted. I'm earning 6 figures, and yet I cannot keep a job. And so I mistakenly thought that I was the problem. And so that's what had me on the edge of the ocean at a place called Salt Creek Beach, on the verge of doing the unthinkable. But God said no, and he intervened with a phone call that I received 10 minutes before that moment. And I stepped out of myself long enough to take that call. And that's when my daughter, my youngest daughter, Delilah, started screaming. I mean, screaming at the top of her lungs into this phone and crying hysterically and telling me that she is being harassed, that she is being set up, that they're about to fire her. She's about to lose her job. And, she just starts describing the most heinous things that these people are doing to my baby, okay? And so, Dr. Rowe, I don't know if you have children, but it's one thing to mess with me, okay? But it is a whole nother thing, okay, to mess with my babies. And I've got 2 girls. And so when I heard the despair in my daughter's voice, and I realized that she was experiencing the same thing I was experiencing, and if I didn't go help her, she would be on the verge of doing the unthinkable just like I was. And so that was actually the catalyst. That was the spark that snapped me out of my funk. Okay, I was homeless at the time. I packed up my cats and my stuff out of the extended stay I was in, and I drove back to Colorado where my daughter was. And I dealt with that company because I was an expert at fighting. I knew how to fight. And that was really kind of the catalyst, the spark that made me realize, okay, this is not a me issue. There are other Black people, including both of my children, who are experiencing the same thing. And so after doing some investigative work, we decided that we were going to put together a roadmap, a survival guide to teach our people what we were doing to repeatedly get these 6-figure settlements. We were going to teach our people how to fight back. And so that's where Hush Money came from. It is a roadmap, but there is not another set of books like this in the world. It is a roadmap that teaches you every step I took repeatedly to take down these toxic leaders, take down these organizations, and walk away from these toxic jobs, but not walk away empty-handed.
Wow. how can one practice self-care while facing discrimination at work? Because that's like an incredible, stressful time when you're going through something like that, especially if you haven't found a strategy to address what's going on. So are there any specific practices that you can share with us?
So when you're in the thick of things, okay, you are in a hostile, an absolutely hostile work environment, okay, and you're fighting for your career life. And now I always tell people, I fully support anyone who is putting themselves first because they're being damaged to such a degree that staying in that organization any longer just is not possible because of the damage that is being done to their mental, their physical, and their emotional health. And so self-care is really important as you're going through that. But I just never had it in me, honestly, to walk away from a fight. I knew, because like I said, I knew how to fight. And by the third time of having my career derailed, and by that third settlement, I'm looking up at the sky and saying, Lord, okay, it's happening again, Lord. But, I might just be willing to put up with 7 months of hell because I know at the end of the 7 months is a 6-figure rainbow, okay? And so in the midst of all that, the only thing that I could do to put up with this long enough to wait until I set that company up, because they thought they were setting me up, but I was setting them up too. And as they were doing things to me, I was documenting it and putting my strategy in full effect. But the self-care piece, the only thing that kept me going, okay, honestly, was a phrase that my mom used to say to me. And so this is probably not going to be effective for everyone, but this was my own personal version of self-care. This is how I kept my sanity. I could hear my mom saying, if you don't fight for yourself, who will? And there was something in those little tiny words. I mean, it doesn't seem significant to anyone but me. It was just hearing my mom's voice saying those words that would just snap me back into warrior mode. And I would say, okay, I can do this. It was like giving me a dose of self-care. So what you have to do is you've got to figure out what is it that will keep you sane? What is it that will keep you motivated? What is it that will allow you to go through this horrific experience that you're going through, but allow you to maintain, your sanity, not to completely go into despair and to completely be broken. That's what did it for me. Now, that is not going to work for everyone, but that was my own personal way. My daughter had something different that she did. She had affirmations, and so every day she would just repeat these affirmations, and they would center her and help her stay focused and basically give her a wall of protection just around herself as she's in these trenches, in these ditches, collecting evidence while these people are doing everything that they can to destroy her. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So have you used your own background and personal experience to advocate for racial equality and justice in corporate America outside of the clients that you help?
So, the books, like I said, the books lay out a roadmap, okay? And then in addition to that, I teach classes. In addition to that, I actually have employers that bring me into their organizations to help their leaders find and identify what they can't see so that they can fight. Because like I said earlier, you can't fight what you can't see. You have to be able to see what, as of right now, you can't. And that is not just speaking to employees, that is speaking to employers as well.
What role do allies and advocates play in supporting employees who may be experiencing discrimination or, of course, racism or toxic workplaces in fostering more inclusive and equitable work environments. I have a lot of listeners who, of course, are non-Black. And so how can they do to speak up, to support their colleagues who are experiencing these types of incidences?
So remember, 90% of the racism that is occurring in today's workplace is hidden below the surface. You can't see it. You don't know it's there. So for allies, accomplices, abolitionists who want to be able to stand up and advocate in a meaningful and authentic and genuine way, they have to understand what we're dealing with. They have to be able to see what they can't see. And so what hush money does, I'll tell you, there was a person by the name of Amy, and I will never forget this review. So right now, hush money is a #1 Amazon bestseller in Black and African American Christian fiction, okay? I had to fictionalize hush money based on my own experiences and how I took down this one company. Because, of course, when you get a big 6-figure settlement, they're going to give you that hush money to buy your silence. But before you get to skip down the road with that big fat check, they're going to give you something else. They're going to give you something called an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, that says that you can't go out and tell the world what happened to you in their organization. So I took their hush money, I signed their NDA, but I still found a way to tell the world what happened to me by fictionalizing my book and creating a character called Ebony so that you could see and feel and smell my circumstances in a real and authentic way through Ebony. And so when an ally, an accomplice, or an abolitionist wants to help, okay, they want to get involved, sometimes it can be discouraging for them. I've had people tell me, I want to help, I want to do something to help Black people, but, they tell me I'm part of the problem. They say, I don't understand what you're going through. And you're right, I don't understand. Well, hush money puts them into the shoes, into my shoes, and they feel what I went through. They feel my mistakes. They feel my trauma. They feel my pain. They feel my humanity, because these companies, when they are targeting you, they don't see you as human. Okay, you are not human to them. And so you have to put the humanity back into a situation that is dehumanized. And so that's what hush money does for allies, abolitionists, and accomplices. They step into my shoes and they feel what I went through in a real and authentic way. So going back to Amy, Amy is a woman who wrote a review on Amazon shortly after hush money came out. And Amy said something to the effect of, I wanted to examine my role in white supremacy, to see, were people really being affected the way that they say they are, so she just wanted to educate herself. She wanted to find out, how her role in white supremacy really affected Black people. And she said that she had become comfortable with her education, what she had learned so far, until she picked up hush money. And she said what she experienced in reading that book was more horrifying and more gut-wrenching than any amount of educating she could have done on her own. And she said, when she came out of that book, she was sick to her stomach, but it changed her. And, hush money also received the gold medal, okay, for social issues novels out of thousands and thousands of books from dozens and dozens of countries from readers' favorites. And the person who was responsible for reviewing hush money and working with the committee to give us the gold, she said it made her sick to her stomach. It was a toxic cocktail of just gut-wrenching emotion. And so for anybody who has never experienced racism, in order for you to be effective, you have to see and feel and smell our circumstances. And Hush Money does just that. Like I said, I'm not a professional writer. In fact, in higher education, I worked on the finance side. I was a number cruncher, didn't have the first clue about writing a book. And I was so traumatized in writing Hush Money that I couldn't go back and read it. I mean, it's got all kinds of flaws in it. I mean, misplaced commas here and there, and I couldn't even get it edited because I was so just mortified by what I went through and triggered. So it is a book that we published as is, and it is raw. It is raw, and it will make you sick. But if you allow yourself to get past being triggered and allow yourself to get past my trauma, you're going to feel empowered and triumphant because, like I said, I lay out my strategy on how I took down this organization, and it is powerful. But you've got to step into that environment. You've got to see what we go through. And right now, you can't see it.
Are there any future projects or initiatives that you're working on right now to continue the mission of fighting against racial discrimination?
So the Hush Money series starts off with the Hush Money, how one woman proved systemic racism in her workplace and kept her job. I was too triggered by the time I finished that book, so I had to decompress. I had to give myself time to rejuvenate. Then I came back and I finished telling the story. So Hush Money, The Cost of Being Black in Corporate America, is the sequel. These two books combined tell one explosive story that is absolutely provocative because not only does book one do just a humongous deep dive into what we experience working while Black, but book two goes into those other isms that we experience and the other things. And so I just have to warn you, in book two, I go into deep detail about my experience with a white man who set his sights on me in this organization, because in toxic organizations, especially if you are a Black woman, sometimes there's somebody in that organization who fetishizes you. And so book two goes into that whole situation. I warn you, book two is provocative. I really had to think about how deep into detail did I want to go about my experience. And I decided, I cannot hide what happened to me. And so I made the decision to tell the world what happened when this white man set his sights on me in this organization. And so it goes into those other isms, including, fetishization. Okay. The third book that I am working on right now that will be released later on this year is called Hush Money, The Black Employee's Guide to Fighting Racism in the Workplace. This book is powerful because, I told you that I was successful over a nearly 20-year period in receiving multiple six-figure settlements, and taking down these companies. And it was really rewarding because when you make a company go deep into their pockets like that, they actually frown upon that. And once they get you out of the way, they go back and deal with the minions, okay? They deal with the leader and all those minions that put them in the situation of having to go deep into their pockets. And so in fighting back, not only was I getting what I needed out of that organization, but I felt like I was preventing others from suffering the same fate by exposing these people. And so this third book actually teaches the other things that I learned over, this nearly 20-year period, because as the years progressed, I actually got smarter and my strategies evolved. And so, this book goes into detail about, how I was able to get a six-figure settlement, resign from my job, and yet still collect unemployment. It goes into how I was able to get a double settlement, from this company and workman's comp. So it goes into a lot of details that I learned over the years, things that were not included in the first two Hush Money books, but that I learned along the way. And so it is a very, very, very powerful, comprehensive book in terms of all the new knowledge that I acquired and how my strategies evolved. And then I also teach another master class the first master class is the beginner's class called How to Fight Discrimination in a Toxic Workplace, which goes into this is how you fight. This is how you motivate those toxic employers to want to settle with you. The next class is called How I Escaped My Toxic Job with the Six-Figure Settlement. And that goes into negotiating. How do you get those companies to pay you top dollar settlements? Because the companies will lowball you. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that you are in a position of power. You can negotiate. You don't have to accept the first thing that they offer you because they're going to offer you an offensively low amount. And so that class focuses on the strategy of negotiating. How do you drive that number up from the low amount that they want to offer you? And so those are the things, that I'm currently working on.
In your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience and protect yourself against workplace discrimination?
And I hate to sound like a broken record, but you have to understand what you're dealing with. You cannot fight what you cannot see. And so once you are able to identify and once you are able to develop that strategy, it gets easier. You develop resilience because each time this happens to you, the battle is easier to fight.
Well, Ms. Abram, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Can you take the time to let everyone know how they can get a copy of your book, Hush Money, or take one of your master classes if they feel they are experiencing discrimination or a toxic work environment?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for that opportunity. So the best place to get my Hush Money books, and remember there are two of them that go together, I would strongly encourage you to get both books. Each book is about $16 or so on Amazon. Remember, we're self-published. We actually couldn't get a publisher, so we self-published, and I sold these books from the trunk of my car. 7 months later, they were #1 Amazon bestsellers. Hush Money is #1 on Goodreads for best eye-opening African-American Christian fiction, women's fiction. #1 on Goodreads for books to improve your social justice awareness on racism. #1 in best Black female protagonist, and #1 in about 3 other categories on Goodreads. As I mentioned, it is also the gold medal recipient for social issues novels, which is the highest honor that a book can receive, getting that gold medal. In addition to that, I have personally been featured in Forbes because of the work I do and how I turned my toxic workplace experience into an international bestseller. I've also been on ABC News. I've been on Spectrum News. I've been in other platforms. The best way to reach me, there are 2 ways to get my attention. The #1 way is LinkedIn. I practically live on LinkedIn, and about 98% of my clients, because I take on clients. I am a consultant. I help. So I don't just teach classes. If you want to become my client, you can have a consultation with me and we could make a decision about whether or not you want to move forward with my services. And I can help you fight this battle so that you are not doing it alone. Now, let me just be very clear. I am not an attorney. I cannot give you legal advice. I am someone who has been repeatedly successful in taking down these organizations and getting these six-figure settlements, okay? I am someone who has leveraged my lived experiences and my pain. I have turned it into power to now teach you if you want to be taught or help you if you want my help. And again, the best way, the number one way to reach me is on LinkedIn. You can also reach me on YouTube. I put incredibly powerful videos on YouTube. All you have to do is comment on one of those and tell me you want to talk to me. And then I will give you information about how to do that, okay?
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I know that if you are experiencing racism in the workplace right now or any other form of discrimination, you know, that you feel like you're alone, sometimes it can be difficult to get an attorney interested in helping you because maybe you don't know how to write an ironclad discrimination case. Maybe you don't know how to collect evidence. But I do want to let you know that I am here. You don't have to be in despair. You don't have to fight this battle alone. There is someone who's willing to step into the ring with you and help you get through this. All you have to do is reach out to me.
Well, Jackie, I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Thank you for being a guest. Please take care.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have just listened to Life Jacked, the Resilience Podcast with your host, Dr. Rowe. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Pandora, Spotify, and any other podcast streaming platform. Remember to live, love, laugh, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.